The crimson flare screamed across the Afghan twilight, its phosphorus trail carving a desperate arc against the darkening peaks of the Hindu Kush. From her concealed position 3,000 meters away, Lieutenant Commander Zara Ghost Volkov lowered her night vision scope and felt her pulse quicken. The emergency signal bloomed like a dying star above grid reference 41S, UB 23,456, 78,901, exactly where SEAL Team 7 should have completed their exfiltration 37 minutes ago. But the silence that followed wasn't the comfortable quiet of a successful mission. It was the pregnant hush before a storm breaks. Through her earpiece, the static-laden voices of the Joint Operations Center painted a picture that made her blood run cold. Overwatch, this is Falcon Base. SEAL Team 7 is 43 minutes past checkpoint. No radio contact since 1847 hours. The voice belonged to Colonel Harrison, a man whose confidence usually filled rooms like Cologne. Tonight, uncertainty leaked through every syllable. Ghost adjusted her position on the rocky outcrop, her ghillie suit blending seamlessly with the granite and sparse vegetation. Her Barrett M82A1 rested against a natural bipod of stone, its scope trained on the valley below where shadows danced in ways that made her veteran instincts scream warnings. She'd been watching this particular stretch of terrain for 6 hours, part of an Overwatch mission that Command had assigned with barely concealed reluctance. "Let the Navy girl play sniper," she'd heard Major Bricks whisper to his aide-de-camp. "Keep her busy while the real operators handle business." The real operators were now sending flares into the sky like prayers. Her radio crackled again. "Overwatch, Falcon Base. We're showing multiple heat signatures converging on the LZ. SEAL Team is compromised. I repeat, SEAL Team is compromised." Colonel Harrison's voice had found its edge again, the kind of controlled urgency that came from watching green dots on a screen suddenly turn red. Ghost's thumb found the safety of her rifle, clicking it off with practiced silence. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes beginning to sparkle in the darkness below, rapid, chaotic bursts that spoke of an ambush sprung perfectly. The SEALs were pinned down in a killing field, their exfiltration route cut off by what appeared to be a full platoon of Taliban fighters who'd been waiting, patient as spiders, for exactly this moment. 5 years of being dismissed, overlooked, and assigned to support roles had led to this. 7 of America's finest warriors trapped in a valley, and the only thing between them and a body bag was a woman they'd never respected enough to fear. Ghost settled her cheek against the stock, her breathing slowing to match the rhythm of her heartbeat. The wind was calm. The range was perfect. And somewhere in that chaos below, men were about to discover why they called her Ghost. The first shot would have to be perfect. They always did. The Taliban fighters moved with the confidence of predators who'd cornered their prey. Through her thermal scope, Ghost counted at least 24 heat signatures surrounding the SEAL's position, a horseshoe formation designed to drive the Americans deeper into the valley where heavier weapons waited. The enemy had done this before. Their positioning was textbook, their patience disciplined. These weren't the usual insurgents high on opium and religious fervor. These were professionals. "Overwatch, Falcon Base. We need immediate close air support on grid 41S, UB 23,456. Danger close authorization granted." Colonel Harrison's voice carried the weight of a man gambling with lives he couldn't afford to lose. Ghost keyed her mic for the first time in 3 hours. "Falcon Base, Overwatch, CAS is 12 minutes out. SEAL Team doesn't have 12 minutes. Her voice was steady, clinical, the kind of calm that came from accepting terrible mathematics. 7 men, 24 hostiles, 12 minutes they didn't have. In the valley below, Petty Officer Marcus Sledge Rodriguez pressed his back against a boulder that provided cover from exactly one direction. Blood seeped through his fatigues from shrapnel that had found the gaps in his body armor. His radio headset crackled with static and the labored breathing of his team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Trident Morrison, who'd taken a round through the shoulder during the initial ambush. "Ghost, this is Trident." Morrison's voice was tight with pain and tactical calculation. "We're effective combat strength of 6, limited ammunition, and they've got us dialed in from 3 sides. I need options." Through her scope, Ghost could see Morrison's position, a depression behind fallen rocks that offered concealment but no real cover. The SEALs had instinctively formed a defensive perimeter, but their position was fundamentally untenable. The Taliban fighters were methodically advancing, using coordinated fire and movement that spoke of extensive training and battlefield experience. "Trident, Overwatch. I have visual on your position. 24 hostiles in a modified horseshoe. Primary threat is the PKM team on the ridgeline at your 2 o'clock. Secondary threats are the RPG teams flanking left and right." Ghost's voice carried the detached professionalism of someone reading a weather report, but her finger was already finding the trigger of her Barrett. The lead Taliban fighter on the ridge was adjusting his machine gun's elevation, preparing to rake the SEAL's position with sustained fire. He wore a tactical vest over traditional robes, carried himself with the bearing of a veteran, and was about to murder 7 Americans. Ghost's crosshairs found the gap between his body armor and collar. Range, 2,847 meters. Wind, negligible. Target, stationary. The Barrett's report echoed across the valley like thunder, the .50 caliber round crossing the distance in less than 3 seconds. The machine gunner's head snapped back in a pink mist, his weapon clattering down the rocky slope as his body crumpled. 1 shot, 1 kill, 23 to go. The Taliban fighters froze for a heartbeat, confusion rippling through their ranks like a stone dropped in still water. They'd planned for close-quarters combat with trapped SEALs. They hadn't planned for a sniper with a Barrett M82 and the patience of a saint. Ghost was already working the bolt, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a fresh round while scanning for her next target. The confusion wouldn't last long. These were professionals, and professionals adapted quickly. But Ghost had been adapting her entire military career, and tonight, adaptation would be measured in precisely placed bullets and the lives they saved. The second Taliban fighter to die never heard the shot that killed him. Ghost's bullet caught him center mass as he sprinted between positions, the .50 caliber round punching through his chest and taking him off his feet like the hand of an angry god. His rifle spun away into darkness, its muzzle flash silenced forever. "Overwatch, Trident, beautiful shooting. That's their squad leader down." Morrison's voice carried a note of professional appreciation that Ghost had never heard directed at her before. In 5 years of military service, she'd grown accustomed to skepticism, condescension, and the subtle dismissal that followed women in combat roles. Tonight was different. Tonight, skepticism was a luxury no one could afford. Through her scope, she watched the Taliban fighters scramble to reorganize. Their casual confidence was evaporating, replaced by the frantic energy of hunters who'd suddenly realized they were being hunted. 2 men were down, and the remaining fighters couldn't locate the source of the incoming fire. The valley's acoustics scattered the rifle's report, making it impossible to pinpoint Ghost's position. The third shot came 47 seconds later, as a Taliban fighter attempted to flank the SEAL's left side. Ghost's bullet took him in the upper torso, spinning him around before dropping him behind a boulder. Through her thermal scope, his heat signature faded to ambient temperature in less than 30 seconds. "Jesus Christ, where is she shooting from?" The voice belonged to Petty Officer Danny Radar Kim, SEAL Team 7's communications specialist. His question carried across the tactical frequency, mixing awe with the kind of desperate hope that bloomed in impossible situations. Ghost was already tracking her 4th target, an RPG gunner who'd been positioning himself to rain high-explosive death on the pinned SEALs. The man moved with tactical discipline, using cover and concealment to mask his approach. But thermal imaging revealed what the naked eye couldn't see, and the Barrett's scope made long-distance execution feel intimate as a handshake. The fourth bullet found its target as the RPG gunner rose to fire. The round caught him in the throat, dropping him instantly and sending his rocket-propelled grenade spinning harmlessly into the night sky. Its explosion lit the valley in orange and white, revealing the Taliban fighters' positions for a brief, crucial moment. Ghost memorized every face, every position, every potential threat. She'd been underestimated her entire career, relegated to support roles and safe assignments while men with half her skill drew the high-profile missions. Tonight, underestimation had become a weapon she wielded with surgical precision. The fifth shot would be different. Through her scope, she could see the Taliban commander attempting to rally his remaining fighters, his voice carrying across the valley as he gestured toward what he believed were the SEAL's weakest points. He was right about the tactical situation, but catastrophically wrong about the threats he faced. Ghost's crosshairs found their mark. Range, 2,943 meters. Wind, still negligible. Target, giving orders he'd never finish. The Barrett spoke again, and 23 became 19. The silence that followed Ghost's fifth shot was different from the calculated quiet that had preceded the ambush. This was the stunned hush of predators who'd suddenly found themselves prey, the bewildered pause of fighters trying to process how their perfectly planned operation had become a nightmare. Through her scope, Ghost watched the surviving Taliban fighters scatter like leaves before a hurricane, their disciplined formation dissolving into individual terror. Overwatch, this is Trident. Morrison's voice carried across the tactical frequency with an emotion Ghost couldn't quite identify. I don't know who you are or where you learned to shoot like that, but you just saved 7 lives. Ghost worked the Barrett's bolt action, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a fresh round with mechanical precision. The remaining Taliban fighters were retreating up the valley's eastern slope, their movement patterns speaking of broken morale and tactical confusion. 5 shots had decapitated their command structure and turned what should have been a simple execution into a supernatural haunting. Falcon Base, Overwatch. Threat neutralized. SEAL team is clear for immediate exfiltration. Ghost's voice remained professionally neutral, but something had shifted in the valley below. Through her scope, she could see the SEALs emerging from their defensive positions with the cautious movements of men who just witnessed something impossible. Lieutenant Commander Morrison keyed his radio, his transmission carrying across multiple channels. Falcon Base, Trident. Overwatch just eliminated 5 hostiles at extreme range in conditions that would challenge the best snipers in the world. We are combat effective and ready for exfil. The silence that followed wasn't just tactical. It was the quiet of an entire joint operations center trying to process what they'd just heard. Ghost had been assigned to Overwatch duty as a courtesy, a way to keep the Navy's persistent female sniper busy while the real operators handled business. No one had expected her to single-handedly break an ambush that should have been unsurvivable. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled across the frequency, carrying a tone Ghost had never heard from him before. Overwatch, Falcon Base. Outstanding work. Outstanding. The word carried weight, the kind of professional recognition that Ghost had spent 5 years earning in fragments and half measures. In the valley below, the SEALs were already moving toward their extraction point with the fluid efficiency of elite operators. But Ghost could see something different in their movement patterns, a subtle acknowledgement, a respect that hadn't existed an hour ago. Through her scope, she watched Petty Officer Rodriguez pause at their rally point and key his radio. Overwatch, this is Sledge. I don't know your name, but I owe you a beer. Hell, I owe you whatever you want. His transmission was informal, unprofessional, and absolutely genuine. In the rigid hierarchy of special operations, such familiarity across units was unprecedented. Ghost smiled for the first time in 6 hours. Sledge, Overwatch, I'll hold you to that. Her reply carried just enough warmth to acknowledge the bond that forms between warriors who have shared fire, the unspoken understanding that transcends rank and service rivalry. The sound of approaching rotors began to echo across the valley. Two MH-60 Black Hawks inbound for extraction, their pilots guided by GPS coordinates and the knowledge that 7 Americans were coming home because someone had been watching over them from the darkness. As Ghost began breaking down her position, preparing for her own extraction, she reflected on the strange mathematics of respect. 5 bullets, 7 lives saved, one night that changed everything. The helicopter blades chopped through morning air thick with dust and the lingering smoke of battle. Ghost sat in the jump seat of the second Black Hawk, her Barrett M82 secured beside her and her ghillie suit replaced by standard fatigues. Across from her, SEAL Team 7 occupied the aircraft with the easy camaraderie of men who'd cheated death and lived to joke about it. Lieutenant Commander Morrison sat directly across from her, his wounded shoulder professionally bandaged but his eyes alert and measuring. For the past 20 minutes of flight time, he'd been studying her with the intensity of someone trying to solve a particularly complex equation. Ghost was accustomed to scrutiny. It came with being a woman in special operations. But this felt different. This was professional evaluation, not gender-based skepticism. "Ghost," Morrison said finally, raising his voice over the helicopter's rotors. "That's your call sign, right?" When she nodded, he continued. 5 shots, 5 kills, extreme range, night conditions, hostile environment. Where did you train?" Ghost had fielded variations of this question throughout her career, usually delivered with the implication that her skills were somehow artificial, products of special treatment or lowered standards. Morrison's question carried no such undertone. He was asking as one professional evaluating another. "Same places everyone else trained, sir, just paid better attention." Her response was measured, neither boastful nor self-deprecating. Through the helicopter's window, she could see the Afghan landscape rolling past, brown mountains and valleys where men fought and died over lines drawn on maps by people who'd never set foot in the region. Petty Officer Rodriguez leaned forward, his face carrying the earnest expression of someone processing a fundamental shift in worldview. "Ma'am, I've worked with Marine Scout snipers, Army Rangers, and Delta Force shooters. What you did last night," he paused, searching for words, "that was something else entirely." Ghost met his gaze steadily. "What I did last night was my job, same as you." The words carried 5 years of frustration, countless instances of being assigned to support roles, while less qualified male counterparts drew the combat missions she trained for. Last night had been different not because her skills had suddenly improved, but because circumstances had finally allowed her to demonstrate capabilities that had always existed. The Black Hawk banked left, approaching Bagram Airfield with the controlled aggression of military aviation. Through her headset, Ghost could hear the air traffic control chatter that marked their return to the relative safety of American-controlled airspace. Soon they'd be debriefed, reports would be filed, and last night's mission would become another entry in classified databases. But something had changed in the space between those 5 rifle shots. Ghost could see it in the SEALs' faces, hear it in their voices, feel it in the way they included her in conversations that would have excluded her 24 hours earlier. Respect earned in combat carried a weight that no amount of training scores or fitness evaluations could match. As the helicopter touched down, Ghost realized that last night hadn't just saved 7 lives. It had finally proven what she'd always known about herself. The debriefing room at Bagram smelled of stale coffee and the peculiar mixture of tension and exhaustion that followed night operations. Ghost sat at a metal table across from Colonel Harrison, Major Bricks, and a Navy intelligence officer whose name tag read CHEN. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across faces that reflected varying degrees of processing what they'd heard over the past 2 hours. Colonel Harrison set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Lieutenant Commander Volkov, in 23 years of military service, I've never seen a single operator alter the tactical situation so dramatically." He paused, consulting the after-action report spread across the table. 5 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 2,800 meters in night conditions, with 0 collateral damage. The enemy force was completely neutralized. Ghost maintained her professional posture, hands folded in her lap, expression neutral. She'd learned early in her career that displays of emotion, pride, satisfaction, even relief, were often interpreted differently when exhibited by women in combat roles. Better to remain clinical, competent, unassailable. Major Bricks shifted uncomfortably in his chair. 24 hours earlier, he'd been the one suggesting she be assigned to support duties, while the real operators handled business. Now he faced the mathematical reality that his support personnel had single-handedly prevented what would have been a catastrophic loss of American Special Operations personnel. The question, continued Colonel Harrison, is what happens next. SEAL Team 7 has requested that you be permanently attached to their Overwatch operations. SOCOM is interested in incorporating your tactics into advanced sniper training protocols. And the Pentagon, he gestured toward a stack of classified communications. The Pentagon wants to understand how we've been underutilizing assets of your caliber. The word assets stung slightly. Ghost had spent 5 years being treated as equipment to be managed rather than a warrior to be deployed. But the tone was different now. She was being discussed as a strategic resource rather than a bureaucratic inconvenience. Intelligence Officer Chen leaned forward, his expression carrying the focused intensity of someone whose job involved connecting dots that others couldn't see. Lieutenant Commander, we've been monitoring Taliban communications in your operational area. The surviving fighters are calling you Malik al-Maut, the Angel of Death. They believe you're supernatural, that bullets can't touch you because you exist between the world of the living and the dead. Ghost allowed herself a slight smile. Good, fear is a force multiplier. Colonel Harrison nodded approvingly. Indeed it is, which brings us to our next discussion. He opened a classified folder marked with Special Access Program designations that Ghost had never seen before. How would you feel about leading a specialized unit designed around long-range precision operations, complete operational autonomy, hand-picked team, direct reporting to JSOC? For 5 years, Ghost had been fighting for the opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities. Now, she was being offered the chance to build something entirely new, to move beyond proving herself and begin proving what was possible when talent was recognized regardless of its packaging. The silence in the room stretched as she considered the implications. Leading meant responsibility not just for her own performance, but for the lives and careers of those who'd serve under her command. It meant stepping into a role that no woman had held in special operations, becoming a symbol whether she wanted to or not. I accept, she said simply. 6 months later, Ghost stood on the tarmac at an undisclosed location, watching her hand-picked team conduct final equipment checks before their first official mission. The unit designation was classified, their existence known only to a select few within the special operations community, but their reputation had already begun to spread through unofficial channels. The team consisted of 8 operators, each selected for specific skills that complemented Ghost's long-range capabilities. Master Sergeant Alina, Phantom, Kozlov, formerly of Army Special Forces, specialized in close-quarters combat and urban warfare. Staff Sergeant Michael Cipher, Washington, brought signals intelligence and electronic warfare expertise from his time with the 75th Ranger Regiment. The others carried similarly impressive credentials, and all shared one critical characteristic. They'd been overlooked or underutilized by conventional special operations hierarchies. Ghost had learned that the military's most dangerous operators weren't always the ones who looked the part. Sometimes the deadliest weapons came in unexpected packages, wielded by people who'd been forced to prove themselves against impossible standards. Her team represented the military's hidden assets, personnel whose capabilities exceeded their official recognition. Their first mission would take them to Syria, where intelligence indicated a high-value target was coordinating attacks against American interests from a fortified compound in the mountains. Conventional assault would be costly and potentially unsuccessful, but Ghost's unit specialized in what she called surgical solutions, precise applications of force that achieved maximum effect with minimum collateral damage. As the team boarded their transport aircraft, Ghost reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought her to this moment. From overlooked Navy sniper to unit commander, from support personnel to strategic asset, from ghost to legend. The transformation hadn't changed who she was, it had simply revealed what had always been there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The aircraft's engines spooled up, their whine building to the familiar crescendo of military aviation preparing for distant operations. Through the small window beside her seat, Ghost could see the sun setting behind mountain peaks that looked remarkably similar to the Afghan landscape, where everything had changed 6 months earlier. Lieutenant Commander Morrison's voice crackled through her headset. He'd been assigned as liaison officer for this mission, bringing his SEAL team expertise to complement her unit's capabilities. Ghost, Trident, weather's clear over the target area. Moon phase is optimal for night operations. Looks like we're getting the same conditions that worked so well for us in Afghanistan. Ghost keyed her mic, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. Copy that, Trident. Same conditions, better team, improved odds. She paused, watching the landscape roll past below. Let's go to work. The compound sat like a concrete tumor against the Syrian mountainside, its walls thick enough to stop small arms fire, and its position chosen to provide commanding views of all approach routes. Intelligence estimated 12 to 15 fighters inside, all well-armed and experienced in defending against conventional assault. The target, a bomb maker responsible for IEDs that had killed dozens of American personnel, occupied the fortified building's central core. Ghost lay prone on a rocky outcrop 3,200 meters away, her Barrett M82 trained on the compound through a scope that could resolve individual faces at impossible distances. Around her, concealed in positions that would be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for them, her team maintained overwatch on every possible escape route. Ghost, Phantom. I have 3 sentries on the north wall, 2 more on the eastern approach. They're rotating every 47 minutes. Phantom's voice carried the clinical precision of someone who'd been watching patterns develop over the past 6 hours. Cipher, Ghost. Electronic signatures indicate 12 cellular devices inside the compound. Thermal imaging confirms 14 human heat signatures. Washington's intelligence update provided the kind of real-time battlefield awareness that turned difficult missions into manageable ones. Ghost adjusted her scope's focus, bringing the compound's main entrance into crystal clarity. Through the reinforced glass, she could see shadows moving in what appeared to be a central courtyard. The building's design was Middle Eastern traditional modified with modern security considerations, thick walls, minimal windows, multiple defensive positions. The target himself had been identified through signals intelligence and confirmed by human assets on the ground. Abu Hassan al-Rawi, 43 years old, former Iraqi military engineer turned terrorist, responsible for innovations in improvised explosive devices that had made roadside bombs more deadly and harder to detect. His elimination would save American lives, but the mission parameters required 0 collateral damage and no evidence of American involvement. Ghost, Trident. We're in position for breach and clear if needed, but your call on primary approach. Morrison's voice carried the respect that had developed over 6 months of joint operations. He'd learned to trust Ghost's tactical instincts, even when they conflicted with conventional special operations doctrine. Through her scope, Ghost could see the target emerge from the building's central structure. Abu Hassan al-Rawi was smaller than his intelligence photos suggested, but he carried himself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding others. He paused in the compound's courtyard, speaking to subordinates whose faces Ghost memorized through her scope's magnification. The wind was negligible. The range was extreme but manageable. The target was stationary, unaware that death was watching him through precision optics from more than 3 kilometers away. Ghost's breathing slowed to match her heartbeat, her finger finding the Barrett's trigger with practiced familiarity. The bullet's flight time would be approximately 4.5 seconds. In that brief eternity, physics and precision would combine to deliver justice across an impossible distance. Ghost had made similar shots before, but never with such strategic implications, never with the knowledge that success or failure would ripple through geopolitical calculations far beyond the Syrian mountains. She exhaled slowly, finding that perfect moment between heartbeats when the human body achieves natural stillness, and squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure of someone signing their name. The Barrett's report echoed across the valley like thunder, but Abu Hassan al-Rawi never heard it. Ghost's bullet crossed the distance in 4.3 seconds, finding its target with the precision of mathematics translated into kinetic energy. Through her scope, she watched the terrorist bomb-maker crumple to the compound's concrete courtyard, his subordinates scattering like disturbed ants as they tried to comprehend what had just happened. Ghost Phantom, target is down. Compound personnel are in complete disarray. No return fire, no organized response. Phantom's voice carried professional satisfaction mixed with something approaching awe. Even among special operations personnel, shots at ranges exceeding 3 kilometers bordered on the mythical. Ghost worked the Barrett's bolt action, chambering a fresh round while scanning the compound for secondary targets. The mission parameters called for elimination of the primary target only, but tactical situations had a way of evolving beyond original planning. Through her scope, she could see armed fighters emerging from the building's interior, their movements speaking of confusion rather than coordinated response. All units Ghost, primary objective complete. Maintain Overwatch for 60 seconds, then we're exfiling. Ghost's voice carried the calm authority of someone who'd transformed from underestimated asset to proven commander. Around her, 8 operators acknowledged the order with brief radio confirmations that spoke of absolute trust in her tactical judgment. The compound below had devolved into chaos. Fighters ran between buildings, shouting orders that no one seemed to be following, searching the surrounding terrain for threats they couldn't locate. Several fired wildly into the darkness, their muzzle flashes revealing positions but not finding targets. The precision of Ghost's shot had achieved something beyond mere elimination. It had created supernatural fear among enemies who now believed themselves hunted by invisible forces. Ghost Cipher. Syrian government forces are mobilizing from the regional command post. We have approximately 12 minutes before they reach this grid square. Washington's intelligence update provided the timeline that would govern their withdrawal. Syrian forces responding to gunfire in their territory was predictable, but their arrival would complicate extraction and potentially compromise the mission's covert nature. Ghost began breaking down her shooting position with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd performed this sequence dozens of times. The Barrett was secured and camouflaged within 90 seconds, leaving no trace of the precision platform that had just reached across more than 3 kilometers to deliver American justice. Her ghillie suit blended seamlessly with the rocky terrain as she began moving toward the extraction point. All units Ghost, beautiful work. Exfil Route Alpha, Rally Point Bravo, move with purpose. Her transmission carried the satisfaction of a mission perfectly executed, objectives achieved without complications or collateral damage. Abu Hassan al-Rawi was dead, his bomb-making expertise permanently removed from the terrorist equation, and Ghost's unit remained shadows that had struck without leaving evidence of their presence. As the team converged on their extraction point, Ghost reflected on how much had changed since that night in Afghanistan when 5 shots had altered the trajectory of her military career. She was no longer proving herself. She was proving what was possible when talent was recognized and properly deployed. The helicopter blades were already spinning when Ghost's team reached the landing zone, the aircraft's pilots maintaining power and ready for immediate departure. Syrian government forces would find an empty compound, a dead terrorist, and no answers to explain what had happened in their mountains. The mission would be attributed to rival factions or internal disputes, just another casualty in a conflict that had already claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. But in classified briefing rooms in Washington, Pentagon officials would read after-action reports that detailed capabilities they'd never imagined possible. Ghost's unit was writing new chapters in the doctrine of precision operations, demonstrating that sometimes the most effective military force was the one that remained completely invisible. As the helicopter lifted off into the Syrian night, Ghost realized that she'd finally found her place in the military hierarchy, not as an exception to be managed or an anomaly to be explained, but as exactly what she'd always been, a weapons system designed for impossible missions and perfect execution. The medals ceremony took place in a classified facility whose existence wasn't acknowledged by any government organization chart. Ghost stood at attention in her dress blues, the navy cross heavy against her chest alongside ribbons that told the story of 5 years spent proving herself, and 2 years spent proving what others could achieve when led properly. Secretary of Defense Patricia Williams approached the small podium with the bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected global security. Her presence at this ceremony spoke to the strategic importance of Ghost's unit and the missions they'd completed over the past 24 months. 18 successful operations, 0 casualties, and a reputation that had begun influencing enemy behavior across multiple theaters of operation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Secretary Williams began, her voice carrying across the small assembly of military personnel whose security clearances exceeded those of most cabinet members. "We gather today to recognize exceptional service in the defense of American interests and the protection of American lives." Ghost maintained her military bearing while her mind processed the strange mathematics of recognition. The Navy Cross was the service's second highest decoration, awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat against an armed enemy force. But the real significance lay not in the medal itself, but in what it represented: official acknowledgement that her contributions had exceeded the highest standards of military performance. Behind her, arranged in a formation that would have been impossible 2 years earlier, stood the 8 operators who comprised her unit. Master Sergeant Kozlov, Staff Sergeant Washington, and 6 others whose capabilities had been overlooked by conventional special operations hierarchies, until Ghost had assembled them into something unprecedented in military history. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood among the assembled officers, his presence representing the SEAL community that had first witnessed Ghost's capabilities during that night in Afghanistan. Beside him, Colonel Harrison maintained the professional demeanor that had characterized their relationship, since he'd been forced to reevaluate his assumptions about female combat effectiveness. "Lieutenant Commander Volkov," Secretary Williams continued, "your leadership of classified operations has resulted in the elimination of 17 high-value targets, the disruption of multiple terrorist networks, and the development of tactical innovations that have been incorporated into special operations training across all service branches." The citation would remain classified, its details known only to those with need-to-know access to Ghost's operational history. But the public record would show that a Navy officer had received the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism, and that recognition would ripple through military communities that tracked such things. As Secretary Williams pinned the medal to Ghost's uniform, she whispered words that weren't part of the official ceremony. "You've changed everything, not just for women in combat, but for how we think about capability and leadership. Thank you." Ghost's response was equally quiet, meant only for the Secretary's ears. "Ma'am, I just did my job, same as everyone else." But both women knew that wasn't entirely accurate. Ghost hadn't just done her job, she'd redefined what the job could be, expanded the boundaries of what military leadership looked like, and proven that excellence recognized no demographic limitations. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of unit citations to Ghost's team members, each decoration representing capabilities that had been hidden within the military's ranks, until someone had been willing to look beyond conventional expectations. As the assembly dispersed, Ghost found herself approached by a young Navy lieutenant whose uniform carried the insignia of a recent Naval Academy graduate. "Ma'am," the lieutenant said, her voice carrying the mixture of nervousness and determination that Ghost remembered from her own early career, "I wanted to thank you for proving it was possible." The young officer's eyes held the same hunger that Ghost had carried for years, the desire to serve at the highest levels regardless of the obstacles that others placed in the way. Ghost studied the lieutenant's face, seeing her own younger self reflected in the earnest expression and carefully controlled ambition. "Lieutenant, what's your specialty?" "Explosive ordnance disposal, ma'am. I want to be assigned to special operations support." Ghost smiled, recognizing the carefully worded request for what it was. A young woman asking for the opportunity to prove herself in roles traditionally denied to her gender. The conversation felt like looking backward through time, watching her own story prepare to repeat itself with different characters but identical themes. "Lieutenant," Ghost said, pulling a classified business card from her uniform pocket, "call this number next week. Ask for Master Sergeant Kozlov. Tell her I said you might be what we're looking for." The young officer's eyes widened as she processed the implications. Ghost's unit had become legendary within certain military circles, its existence whispered about in training facilities and officer clubs where people discussed careers they'd never be allowed to pursue. "Ma'am, I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Ghost replied, "because if you could let me down, I wouldn't be making this offer." As the lieutenant walked away, her stride carrying new confidence and purpose, Ghost realized that her greatest impact might not be the missions she'd completed or the targets she'd eliminated. It might be the doors she'd opened, the precedents she'd established, and the young women who would follow paths that hadn't existed before she'd carved them from impossible terrain. The Pentagon briefing room carried the weight of decisions that shaped global security policy. Ghost sat at a polished conference table, surrounded by officers whose insignia represented the highest levels of military command. Generals, admirals, and civilian officials, whose responsibilities encompassed defense strategy for the world's most powerful military force. General Patricia Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, opened the classified presentation with words that would have been unthinkable 5 years earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to discuss the expansion of precision operations capabilities based on the successful deployment of unconventional assets in special operations roles." The phrase "unconventional assets" was military euphemism for what everyone in the room understood: women in combat positions that had previously been restricted to male personnel. Ghost's unit had become the test case, the proof of concept that was reshaping military policy at the highest levels of government. On the wall-mounted screen, classified statistics told the story of revolutionary change. Success rates, casualty figures, mission completion percentages, and cost analyses that demonstrated how properly utilized talent could achieve strategic objectives more efficiently than conventional approaches. The Volkov model, as military planners had begun calling Ghost's integrated approach to special operations,